Let me ask you all a question. How many of you find the subject of flying saucers or UFOs to be quite boring? Not to say that being a witness to UFO phenomenon is not exciting. I'm just saying the drip effect is real. Desensitization is real, my friends. These days, I see a piece of media on UFOs and I am stone-faced. I mean, bored to death. How many of you feel that way? So what is it? I know people want to right away blame things like movies, but I don't think it's the movies, folks. I think that people are gaining a better understanding of what that is. Now, I'm not talking about aliens specifically. Just leave them to the side for a moment as it confuses people. I'm talking about the things people are seeing in the sky, specifically spacecraft. Show me one intelligent individual who still believes that any military that has money does not or did not build UFO-type aircraft. We are almost caught up with the science fiction stories we used to tell about the future. I mean, what's missing? Flying cars? We are only a few years away from seeing drones flying all over the place. Speaking of flying, we are going to take a look at the secret space program to find out how far technology has really advanced. But please excuse the title, folks, because after all, it's not really a secret if we all know about it. You know, sometimes conspiracy theories can take you down rabbit holes that are hard to climb out of. Sometimes what you learn can be so far out there, it makes you wish you had taken the blue pill. I digress on each topic mainly to keep myself from becoming fanatically obsessed, and to keep myself sensitive to each topic. Now, the first thing I want to do is get you to understand and keep reality in mind, because sometimes science fiction can interfere with our logic. I'm sure many of you have heard people that discuss this topic go deep into the alien world. Isn't it odd that there are a ton of people who know about the inner workings of the secret space programs? After all, many have claimed to be in these programs, and some talk about extraterrestrials like it's common knowledge. Well, there's the Greys, they smoke too much. The Palladians, they're a nice bunch. You got the Asgardians of the galaxy. They've got some cool rides. And then there's the Reptilians. You gotta watch out for them. What the hell are you talking about? The secret space program or Star Trek? So folks, we don't want to go there. Not just yet. Let's go slow. Here, I would like to focus on the actual technology and us. Many of us already have a basic understanding that the Nazis, the Russians, the Chinese, the US were all experimenting with flying saucer technology decades ago. How far do you think they have gotten with this technology today? Because I'm pretty sure they have not stopped development. So let's establish a few things so that we can render the best picture here. Since the beginning of the space age, the military-industrial complex, particularly the U.S. military, has worked towards the goal of controlling space. But not just controlling space, but controlling what ascends from Earth and what descends to Earth. How can they do this? Well, we're going to talk about that. First thing to understand is that space is an extremely deadly environment, and an extremely difficult environment to get to. There is something called the Earth-Moon gravity well, and this is how everything tends to stay in its place, including us being stuck to this planet. So the way this works is, this planet and everything in it and on it is a big mass of concentrated energy. Gravity causes this mass of energy to move together. When an object is pulled in by Earth's gravity, it is pulling in an extra piece of mass and energy. Now, if you want to leave this big mass of energy, you are going to have to give gravity back energy in return. A lot of it. The reason you have to give back so much energy is because the mass of energy you are on is extremely large. And so the closer you are to this energy mass, the more energy you need to escape it. So in order for you to get to space, you're going to need to find a way to give back energy and increase your gravitational potential energy at the same time. So you build a machine to do just that. This comes in the form of a rocket. The fuel in the rocket is used in a controlled burn to force that energy through the exhaust toward the Earth, giving the rocket the potential energy needed to launch. But even if you do get the rocket to launch, after it gains enough altitude, it begins to lose energy and drag. So you need more fuel. But adding more fuel means that you're adding more mass to the rocket, which means you're going to need more fuel, which means you're adding mass to the rocket, which means you need more fuel. And you keep going and going until you get this multi-million-pound rocket. Now, you can't burn all the fuel constantly until you get into space. That won't work. Instead, you use a multi-stage system, dividing the rocket up into sections that will burn one at a time. So, as you move further away from Earth, the mass of the rocket decreases as it still has enough fuel energy to push it away from Earth. But oh folks, the fun has just begun, because now comes the radiation. If there is anything electronic, even mechanical, and if you are on that rocket, you are going to need radiation shielding beyond belief. Not only that, you're going to have to know where those Van Allen belts are to avoid those zones. Not to mention that the younger you are, the more damaging the radiation will be on your body. If you successfully get through all that, there is another obstacle ahead. One that many people overlook, and one that may prevent future generations from leaving the Earth at all. And that is space junk. Debris. You're probably thinking, well, space is big. How bad can it be? Bad. Very bad. You know, you can bury trash made of metals and plastics. Some of it gets into the oceans, but over a period of time, those materials will break down and disintegrate. Slowly but surely. But in space, those materials stay there. All those years of launching thousands of satellites, millions and millions of pounds of rockets, still up there. No, there aren't pieces of wreckage floating out into deep space. All that crap is stuck right here in the gravitational field of the Earth, Moon, and Sun. That stuff is going nowhere, unless it is pulled in by one of these massive objects. One little tiny piece of debris can mess you up your trip. And soon, leaving Earth will be like flying through a hailstorm of man-made debris. Navigating through that would be next to impossible. If you somehow figured out how to do all that and make it into space, it is pretty much law where you're going to have a military payload on board, or it's a no-go even before you launch. The military controls space as far as we are concerned. You think SpaceX and these other space programs are exempt? You think they're going to just let them launch a car into space with no military payload attached? But let's say you do agree to those terms and get approved for launch. You're going to have to train and condition your body for several weeks. I don't know why people think that they can just jump aboard a rocket or spaceship as is and not be affected by space conditions. You have to prep your body. You have to change your diet. There are certain foods and beverages you cannot consume. Not only that, but when you're in space, you're going to have to find a way to keep your body from turning into mush because of the lack of gravity. This is why taking almost a year to get to Mars won't work. That time has to be at least cut in half. under 6 months, I believe you are going to have a very bad time staying alive. I know movies have you believe that we can simulate gravity in a spaceship. We just make it spin and centrifugal force will act as gravity. Well, how does centrifugal force work without gravity? If you're in space in a ship that is spinning, then wouldn't that ship just spin around you as you're floating in the air? Folks, this is just a handful of the complications with space travel, out of the dozens of challenges you will have to face. So after knowing all this, you could see how one would make efforts to find a completely new way of getting off the planet. And we have come a long way. But see, there is still a space industry, a program they want to keep running the way it does. They don't want to show you a flying saucer launch because that would be used as a weapon, just like rockets are used as weapons. Speaking of weapons, I want to remind you all of something that happened recently. How many of you remember the announcement of the Chinese satellite Tiangong-1 entering Earth's atmosphere and then going down in the South Pacific? Well, debris from space does this every several months, so it is not uncommon for this to happen. The question is, what was on board these fallen craft? Well, it's no secret that many of these satellites have nuclear cores. You think space shuttles only carry people? Think about the Columbia and Challenger disasters. What elements were scattered after those disasters, and there have been plenty others. The point is, somebody's getting poisoned by all this. There is a price we all pay besides our tax dollars. So you see, folks, if we are going to continue this venture into space exploration, you can see why it would be imperative to come up with better options. The problem with that is, having something like flying saucer technology places a great amount of power in the hands of who controls it. So after 2 world wars, you have to ask yourself, after the Second World War, what would governments around the world at that time be inclined to do? Well, if they're smart, they would do everything in their power to prepare and hopefully prevent a 3rd World War. So it is not surprising that these governments would take measures to improve their military and intelligence capabilities. And the key is space. I'm talking space-based monitoring, spying, tracking, space-based weaponry and vehicles. The future of warfare is where the soldiers are machines. Let's start with something simple, such as a Predator drone. Now, before we go further, keep in mind that where there is one aircraft, there are probably several aircraft in that area, as military craft like to fly in systems. This is the MQ-1B Predator. By the way, folks, those letters and numbers, the Tri-Service Aircraft Designation Code. For example, the M stands for multi-role, and the Q stands for unmanned drone. You have the design number and a series letter. Now this bad boy has a 55-foot wingspan and weighs in at about as much as a small car. But it can take off at twice its weight. And it is designed to carry up to 450 pounds of payload. Meaning 2 laser-guided AGM-114 Hellfire missiles. Which are good for moving targets in bad weather. The price tag? $20 million. That includes 4 aircraft, a ground control station, a satellite link, and no, you can't have one. It has several other features, but this is something that we know is real. But this is a child's toy compared to what was supposedly in the air back in the 50s. Speaking of unmanned aircraft, what was this thing doing in orbit for years before they decided to land it? The X-37B. I take it from the X that this was used for research to develop better aircraft and or rockets. X-planes started out as experiments and some were actually missiles. They can use them to test surveillance equipment, engines, perhaps new weaponry, of course. Besides the few $100 million project price tag, it was interesting to find that there were allegations that this aircraft had been spying on the Chinese craft Tiangong-1. Really? In fact, there was a lot of press about what this craft was doing all that time. So there should be no doubt in anyone's mind that we can effectively operate flying vehicles unmanned, as this is old technology. See, the technology in the 40s and 50s was relatively new to most. They really started revving up these projects in the 60s through the 80s. I mean, they have had the B-70 Valkyrie in '64. This plane could fly at over twice the altitude of today's commercial jets, 70,000 feet. A strategic bomber that could fly at speeds of Mach 3 for thousands of miles. That's over 2,000 miles per hour. This was a bomber, folks, in the 60s. A $1.5 billion program that exceeded $800 million in 1961. Are you with me so far? Now, courtesy of Lockheed Martin, we have the SR-75 Penetrator, also known as the Aurora spy plane, and the XR-7 Thunder Dart. Some say that this is a mythical plane, but I don't see anything mythical about it, besides being able to travel at speeds between Mach 6 and 8, which is unfathomably fast, but not impossible, right? Especially not after NASA's X-15 rocket plane hit Mach 6.72. And those planes are dropped out of a B-52, which can hold 3 X-15 rocket planes. As we move up there in aerotech design, you have to come up with more efficient engines and propulsion systems. You need a drive, which is what harnesses the power to run the engine, such as a magneto-hydrodynamic drive, like a hybrid engine. So the idea here is you can create a propulsion force by using electromagnets, an electrically conductive fluid, a plasma, like salt water. When this plasma is within the electrically charged magnetic field, it causes the ionized particles to move faster in a desired direction. The same idea as what the LHC does, CERN. The magnets drive the particles in a certain direction very fast. So what you can do now is you can put this on a boat and use the water underneath as the plasma. It enters the front and is forced out the rear of the boat, thus pushing the boat forward. The only problem is that the boat is quite slow, but it moves. In a car, it is used to drive the motor. These drives are more effective underwater or in space, where there is less restrictions created by gravity, allowing hypersonic travel. There is something called electrogravitics, and this is where you use electricity to create a force based on the object's mass, like gravity. T. Townsend Brown created patents for electrogravitic propulsion systems back in the 20s. The Navy became interested in them back in the 50s. More technology from the 50s again. There is speculation that the B-2 Spirit, or a stealth bomber, is using this propulsion system secretly. The Air Force says that the stealth bomber is actually powered by 4 General Electric F-118-100 turbofan engines. But the F-118-100 was designed specifically for the stealth bomber back in 1988. You mean to tell me they are still using the same model engines from the 80s? What is the name of the upgraded engine? Now, when it comes to planes, we know how high they can make them fly, and we know how fast they can make them move, and we know how long ago these achievements were made. And the one thing these craft all have in common is that they are identifiable. Even at night, an airplane can be identified because we have gotten used to the position of the lights on the craft when they are in flight. But let's say you have something like the USAF Jet Flying Wing Disc flying overhead. In 1967, seeing this craft from the bottom would have appeared to be quite alien indeed. And perhaps that was the whole point, to make it look that way. But after seeing this vehicle from the top, you can see how this would work. Vehicle from the top, you can see how this would work as a man-made vehicle, and suddenly it doesn't seem so alien. At this point, besides the weapons that these craft carry, the technology is pretty conventional and doesn't really go outside of our understanding of physics, and for the most part, the technology is pretty safe. But as we change the shape of the craft and use unconventional technology and nuclear engines, things become more secretive. Concepts get skewed and distorted, and you can really only rely on eyewitness accounts to make sense of any of the aircraft I am about to mention. But one of the things I want you all to understand before we go forward is one of the reasons to keep experiments like this secret is because when you are working with nuclear energy, you basically have a flying machine of death. The Bell. I'm sure you all have all heard of this Nazi creation. Some say it never existed, but we all know that at the height of such a war, they would have made anything. Some say that this machine was intended to be used for time travel. Some say it was a weapon, and I agree. This thing was made of heavy metal, and my theory is that this was not going to be a flying vehicle, but a heavily armored floating tank that would emit strong amounts of radiation, killing anyone that came within range of it. I mean, imagine this thing floating down the street, bobbing up and down, irradiating everything in its path. That seems more Nazi-like than flying into space or time travel. This is where we get into black program projects, because now you have technology you can't just declassify, and I think at this point the military is completely comfortable with letting everyone believe that it's aliens flying around in these ships, and they have become very proficient at doing so. How many of you believe that the military has been experimenting with triangular spacecraft? I mean, these are the most commonly observed UFOs. Notice that the shape of these craft is very significant as well. The aerodynamic shape of an airplane, the round disc shape of a flying saucer, and the extruded triangle are all shapes that could work well for a flying craft, depending on the technology. And the triangular craft does tend to go well with the idea of an anti-gravity propulsion system, such as the Belgian Triangle of '89, the Collins-Saunders Triangle of '99. Let's look at the TR-3B of 1990, since this one actually has a designation code, also known as the Black Triangle. At that time, the TR would have stood for Tactical Reconnaissance, and there would have been 3 prototypes, just by looking at the designation code alone. It is said that this craft uses 2 nuclear reactors and a multi-level, multi-stage propulsion system, meaning it can electronically switch sequence to accommodate for torque ripple, which is how much torque the motor puts out. It uses liquid mercury as a plasma, the way I discussed before with magnetohydrodynamics, but using the mercury seems to give the craft an anti-gravitational effect. It has electrochromic paneling, which is also known as smart glass, which can change from light to dark. It can go all black, it can be opaque, it can be clear, all on demand. It is the same technology used in rear view mirrors that automatically tints the glass in different lighting. What I find most interesting about this craft is that it is supposed to have a magnetic field disruptor, and for that you need mercury and a high voltage source. The idea here is that the disruptor can actively reduce the mass of everything within its field, meaning that it also changes the gravitational field. This is theoretically how you can sit inside an aircraft that is zigzagging all over the place and not be affected by those movements while inside the craft. It is the reason that a craft can go from just hovering to lightning speed in a flash. I am betting that the geometrical circuit-like patterns observed outside many of these craft also have everything to do with shape power and anti-gravity. The point here is that all the components of the TR-3B are real scientifically studied concepts that have been known to work. And it's all old technology. But for some reason, people think that it is impossible to put all these components together to make a vehicle out of it. No, they can't do that. They wouldn't do that. Or my favorite is, you conspiracy theorists are all alike. There's no scientific evidence or factual information to support that succotash. Probably the most awesome of these craft sightings is probably that of the massive boomerang UFO, like the claims made by witnesses of the Phoenix Lights. Now this is where things get weird, because these craft seem to be a bit too massive for the military to even construct successfully, let alone put into flight. But they do build these huge rockets and naval craft, so I could be wrong. But how do they not expect anyone to see it? Even if you use electrochromics to black out the entire thing and make it completely silent, what in the world is the point of that when you have spotlights all along the bottom of the craft? This is not something that is trying to hide or be stealthy. You know how many witnesses came out of the Phoenix Lights event? None of these craft with lights on the bottom are trying to be stealthy. They can have all this advanced technology aboard these craft, but they can't see the ground without spotlights underneath. Now, space wars and space weaponry is another topic I would like to get into another time. I just wanted to present you all with the realities and possibilities of what can actually be done with aircraft technology, which in 2018 probably goes way beyond what any of us could imagine. Everything in the dark will come into the light. It takes patience and a clear mind to analyze and discern what is real and what is just science fiction. You know, we rely on eyewitnesses and whistleblowers in court, but for some reason we can't rely on eyewitnesses to unusual flying aircraft. I am sure not all these people are telling the truth, but I am sure that there are many people who believe that what they had seen was real. So, if you got anything out of this presentation, I hope that you will take a look at some of the testimonies that have come out over the years with a new, more informed perspective. Because understanding some mechanics makes these things a bit more realistic when we consider the technology they would have to use. And understanding how these things work gives us a better understanding of why they call it the secret space program.